chains and fire. That's how the night began. Leaf had learned the sound of iron the way some men learn hymns. Chain rubbing against chain. Shackle kissing bone. The rhythm of obedience. He wore that rhythm at the waist and wrists as he hauled barrels in the lower yard, a shadow among torches, a name no one used. Bought by a king who believed victory meant owning the bodies of his enemies. Years of war had starved Leaf of sleep, of softness, of the kind of silence that doesn't listen for footsteps. The first horn cut the air like a blade. The second made the snow lift from the stones. Then came the third, closer, wrong, and the night answered with arrows. They struck the gate like hail with a purpose. Men shouted. Timber groaned. Somewhere above, the bell began to speak in a panicked stutter. Leaf looked up and saw the sky open with sparks. The north tower coughed fire. The old banners curled into themselves like leaves. Inside. Inside, a guard cried, and then the guard's mouth filled with red and he folded into the snow. Leaf didn't run. He listened. Battle has a grammar. Footfalls in the lower corridor, too many. A battering ram at the west postern, too heavy to be faint. The enemy had come not to test the walls but to erase them. He wrapped his chain once around the barrel he'd been dragging, took a breath and pulled. The links bit deep. The pin at his shackle wobbled, squealed, then held. He pulled again, harder, all the hurt years stacked behind the effort. Pain flared white. Something gave, not the chain. The gate bar. It fell and cracked the stone. The shock ran up his arms like lightning and shook loose the thing he'd needed. The rusted pin in the left cuff slid, then jumped, then dropped with a sound too small for the size of relief it delivered. Leaf tore the chain free and wrapped it around his forearm like a coiled snake. He took the corridor toward the high hall because instinct is a stubborn thing, and instinct said the queen would be where the enemy wanted her most. The high hall burned without burning down. Smoke hunched under the rafters. The great doors heaved against a ram that wanted the world to be simpler. Fridas stood before the dais with a drawn seeks and eyes that counted exits. 4 houseguards made a wall of their bodies around her. One was already falling. Another would fall next. Back to the inner stair, my lady, a guard wheezed. No, she said, with a calm that comes from knowing what's at stake and what you'll pay to keep it. The stair cuts us off. The roof gives us lines. Leaf stepped into the doorway and the nearest guard lunged at him on reflex. Chains make a kind of man. Leaf moved past the blade, grabbed the guard's wrist, twisted. Bone spoke. The guard grunted, saw the shackles, saw the eyes behind them, and stopped. Slave, someone spat. Not useful to anyone dead, Leaf said, already moving. He caught the ram's rhythm, 4 beats, then the slam, and timed his strike. On the 4th breath he slipped through the splintered frame like smoke, met the first raider with the chain, and took him down in 2 turns and a choke. The second raider's axe bit the pillar. Leaf gave him his shoulder, his knee, the chain again. The third faced him and hesitated at the sight of a man collared and unafraid. That heartbeat cost him everything. Up, Leaf said to the queen as if the word had always belonged to him. Now. She looked at him fully then. Sea gray eyes. A line at the mouth that said she'd learned how to hold a kingdom without letting it crush her. She didn't argue. She moved. They took the servant's stair, a tight spiral that smelled of tallow and fear. The stone sweated cold. Below, the doors finally gave and the hall swallowed wolves. Above, the roof hatch stuck. Leaf drove a shoulder into it and the night fell on them in black air and snow. The castle sprawled beneath, courts, walls, the outer ward already crawling with dark shapes. The fjord threw back the light in broken pieces. Far off, a ship burned, an orange bruise on the water. This way, Fridas said, and he heard the surprise in her own voice at following a man with chains. They ran low along the roofline, then jumped the narrow to the laundry house, then the stable. Bo screamed. A horse thrashed in its stall, eyes rolled white. Leaf stroked its neck once, murmured a word from a childhood he'd taught himself to forget, and the horse stilled enough for a halter. Can you ride? he asked, already setting the bridle. I can rule, she said. I can ride. They took one horse and left the others to give the alarm shapes to chase. At the postern, 2 raiders waited, confident in the way of men who think they've sealed a bag. Leif slid from the saddle, walked toward them with empty hands, then let the chain speak. Caught the first around the neck and the second around his wrist. The snow accepted both without fuss. They rode into the trees. The world tightened to breath and heartbeat and the smack of branches. Snow caught in hair and fur. The cold bit clean. Behind them, the castle's glow throbbed and dimmed. Ahead, the forest held its own council. They didn't speak for a long stretch. Words break the kind of quiet that keeps you alive. When the horse's steam rose slower and the hill gave them cover, Freydis touched his arm. Why? She asked, simple and absolute. Why help me? Leif kept his gaze on the dark between the pines. The truth is heavy, it needs a spine to carry it. Not all men are born free, he said, voice low. But all can choose what to do with what little remains. She held his eyes on that. The forest seemed to lean in to hear it. Something in her guard dropped. Not the part that kept a kingdom safe, the part that kept a person alone. Who taught you to speak like that? She asked. Chains, he said. And the time inside them. They rode until the horse's breath frosted in a steady rhythm and the trees thinned to show the low roofs of the fishing village. Huts hunched against the fjord like old men shouldering wind. Dogs barked and then didn't. Faces appeared in doorways, candle halos behind them, eyes wide to the sight. A queen in fur and frost, a man with shackles and a chain for a weapon. They slid from the saddle together. The first woman to step forward crossed herself in the quick, tired motion of someone who expects bad news. My lady, she breathed, and then her gaze cut to Leif. It stuck there, as if trying to reconcile the world she knew with the one she was seeing. He saved me, Freydis said before anyone could speak the wrong words. He saved your queen. The sentence went through the crowd like heat. A boy repeated it under his breath as if learning a new rule. An old fisherman spat into the snow to keep his courage from souring. A man at the back shook his head once, hard, and whispered what others were already thinking. Why would a slave risk his life for a queen? Leif heard it. He didn't answer. He stood at the edge of the torchlight, snow melting on his lashes, chain coiled at his forearm like a promise not yet measured. Freydis stood beside him, not behind, and the village saw that too. Judgment gathered in the dark like weather. Somewhere up the hill, the castle groaned and went quiet. Night closed its hand. The wind changed. The question hung in the air, bright and cold as a blade. Why indeed? And before dawn could pry at it, the answer began to move in the trees. The Queen's protector. That was the phrase the court settled on when they ran out of kinder names. They gave Leif a cloak without a crest and a spear with a nicked head, as if to remind him what he wasn't. The iron cuffs stayed, for now, filed thin and ringed in leather so they wouldn't show beneath his sleeves. He stood at the right hand of Freydis during audiences, a shadow against the pillar, the kind of presence you feel before you see. The nobles didn't hide their distaste. Perfume can't sweeten fear when it wears silk. On the first morning back within the walls, the council met under banners that still smelled faintly of smoke. Hakon sat high, chain of office heavy on his shoulders, eyes bright with the kind of suspicion that calls itself prudence. The hall's cold bit through fur to bone. Freydis kept her hands laced, knuckles calm. Only her jaw, tight as a locked door, betrayed the nights she hadn't slept. This man, said Lord Varric, sleek as a seal in winter fat, was purchased from our enemies. The chain is an oath in iron. What oath do we imagine he owes us? Freydis answered before Hakon could. He owes me my life. That is enough oath for any hall. Murmurs like a slow boil. Hakon's mouth tilted. A queen's gratitude is not policy. Leif said nothing. He had learned speech is a gift you don't offer to those who came to steal it. Varric gestured with 2 fingers, lazy, cruel. A dog will obey any hand that feeds it. A wolf remembers the forest. Fridas turned, not to Varric but to the hall. Say it plainly. You fear him because he's useful to me and not to you. Silence stretched. Truth lands with a weight even cowards can feel. Hakon drummed the arm of his chair. We keep him. Under watch. One step wrong and I'll hang him from the east gate and call it justice. After, in the long corridor where tapestries swallowed footsteps, Fridas walked ahead and Leif matched her pace by instinct. Torches hissed. Snow scratched at the arrow slits like a beggar. At the bend she stopped and pressed her palm to the stone as if asking it to steady. They will try to break you, she said without looking back. If they cannot, they will try to break me for standing you upright. I've been broken, Leif said softly. I know the shape. I know how to stand inside it. She glanced over her shoulder, and there it was again. The flicker of seeing him not as a tool but as a man who had paid full price and kept the receipt. Sleep if you can, she said. I cannot. Not yet. Sleep did not come. Not to her. Some nights Leif heard her wake with a breath that was almost a cry. Other nights she walked the gallery until dawn brushed the eaves and the birds remembered their work. He mapped the castle the way wounded men map pain. Stair by stair, gate by gate, where the stone was new and where it had learned to sag. He knew the way the enemy would come because the enemy had trained him to think like water. Find the crack, widen it, keep going. On the fourth night, a scream cut the frost. Leif reached her door as it swung open. Fridas stood barefoot on the rushes, hair loose, sweat beading at her temple, eyes not in this world yet. He didn't enter. He stood at the threshold, palms open. Name it, he said. So it stays smaller. She swallowed. The deck again. Fire everywhere. Hands pulling me down. And then, she stopped. And then? You, she said, and the word was a confession and a scold. You are there before the nightmare remembers to kill me. He exhaled. Then it is learning. She let a breath out that almost laughed. Tell me something true, she said abruptly. Something that doesn't belong to anyone else. Leif considered. The night held its ear to the door. When I was a boy, he said, I could hear snow. Not the fall. The hush after. I thought it was the world forgiving itself. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Stay, she said. There. Outside. If I sleep again. He did. He stood in the dark with the patience of a tree and listened to her breath stitch itself back together. By week's end, rumors had fattened enough to hunt in packs. The slave knows the enemy's trails too well. The slave speaks their dialect when he thinks no one hears. The slave counts gates when he walks past them. Varric let them roam. Hakon fed them with a glance now and then, the way a man flicks scraps to a chained hound just to watch it snarl. Fridas cut at whispers when they rose in her presence. Bring me proof or bring me silence, she said once, and the fire behind the words made even older men look at the floor. But doubt is a tide. It works at foundations you can't see. It creeps. 2 days later she asked Leif to ride with her to the Watch Ridge. Snow lifted in sheets from the windward slope. The fjord lay like hammered iron below. They dismounted behind a broken standing stone, the kind no one remembers praying to but no one dares move. She pulled her cloak tight, breathed the cold until it burned enough to feel like waking. How many men to come from the south and not be seen? She asked. 30 if they were the river, he said. 10 if the moon forgets its work. She glanced at him sideways. You didn't count. You remembered. I was made to, he said, no self-pity in it, only inventory. They taught me maps with hunger. And you left them to save me. She faced the valley. Tell me why that still surprises me. Because I don't belong in your math, he said. Because class is an old god and it eats logic for breakfast. A raven hopped along the stone, bold as a spy. She watched it and spoke without moving her eyes. They say you're planted here. That some enemy lord bought you and sold you back to us with instructions. Leif let the wind take his answer and give it back thinner. They would be smarter if they were. She turned to him fully. You won't give me the easy lie, will you? I don't have the breath for it. You should have stepped back then. You didn't? The distance between them held heat and warning both. Her gaze slid to the cuffs, thin now leather-wrapped, and then back to his face. You know the hall better than my captains already, she said. You know the watch better than my wardens, the kitchens better than my stewards. I know the places where men hide bad decisions, he said. I've cleaned the floors under them. She smiled, small and fierce. The wind whipped her hair like a banner that had chosen its side. Leaf, she said, and his name in her mouth was a thing alive. I am asking you something the court will call reckless and the gods will call pride. You waited. Swear to me, she said. Not to Hacken. Not to the crown that shifts with the head that wears it. Swear to me, Fridas Hacken's daughter. Swear your eyes will be my watch, your hands my blade, your breath my warning. Swear to the person, not the throne. The ridge held its breath. Far below, ice popped like a distant drum. Leaf felt the old world, iron, sail, order, tilt beneath his feet and the new one swing up to meet him. He didn't reach for his knife yet. O's want to be fed. He only bowed, once, deep, all the years of chain turning into something that looked a lot like choice. The blood oath begins with a bowl, a blade, and the kind of silence that chooses its witnesses. Fridas ordered the hall cleared of courtiers but not of eyes. The elders remained, the lawkeeper with his iron tablet, 2 shield maidens who had followed her since girlhood, Hacken high on his chair, the chain of office bright against a face going grayer each winter. Torches hissed. The smoke climbed and returned like a breath reconsidered. Snow ticked at the arrow slits. Leaf stood bare-armed beneath the rafters. No crest. No cloak. The leather-wrapped cuffs still there, thin as a lie you tell to keep peace. He set his knife on the bowl's edge, the blade clean as a priest's hands. The lawkeeper read the old words, voice flat, an oath of flesh to a living soul, blood to blood, breath to breath. Break it and the gods break you. Tradition demanded he swear to king and crown. Fridas had called a different rite. Speak to me, she said, stepping forward into the circle of rushlight. To me, not the medal on his neck. Leaf didn't look up to the dais. He looked at her. I swear my eyes to your horizon, he said. I swear my hands to your danger. I swear my breath to your warnings. I swear to hold what you place in me and never sell it, not for iron, not for bread, not for the small comfort of being safe. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Oaths said quietly are the ones that live. He lifted the knife. The hall leaned in. He drew it across his palm, clean and deep, the way a man cuts rope he never means to tie again. Blood welled, dark, quick. Fridas did not flinch. She held out her hand, unloved. If you fall, I fall, she murmured. She cut her own palm, not as deep, but deep enough to speak. They pressed wounds together over the bowl. Blood met blood. The lawkeeper's tablet caught the drop and took it like a seal. That was when the wind rose. Not from the door. From the stones underfoot. A cold breathed up through the flagstones and slid along ankles and knees and ribs as if the hall had turned into a throat for winter. Torches dipped. Shadows ran backward. Along the central beam, the old carvings, spirals and beast heads and the quiet little marks carvers make when they don't want to say what they've carved, woke with a sickle's glow. Not gold. Not firelight. A pallid blue like moon on iron. Fradis's gaze snapped to the runes. She knew them all in the way a queen must, enough to fear the ones nobody names. The brightness gathered on Leaf's skin, then narrowed to a place just below his left collarbone, where a scar had always sat like an old accusation. The light found it, filled it, revealed it. Not a random welt. A shape. A hooked stave crossed by 2 lines and circled by a ring, an ancient mark burned clean into him. People had the sense to be afraid before they remembered why. The lawkeeper whispered a word that hadn't been legal in a century. One of the shield maidens made the sign against the deep places under the fjord. Hacken stood. The chain on his chest clinked once, a cold little bell. "What is that?" he said, not loud at all. "The old line," Varric breathed, delighted to taste scandal. "Extinct. Banished. The fools who dared Odin and died for it." Freydis did not move her hand from Leif's. Her blood still touched his. She felt the prickle along her wrist like a small storm walking her veins. "What does it mean?" she asked, and the steadiness in her voice steadied the floorboards. "It means curse," the lawkeeper said. "It means oath against the sky." He swallowed. "It means witchcraft, my lady." Hakon descended 3 steps, slow as verdict. "Bought from our enemies," he said softly. "Wearing a mark that spits in a god's eye. Fed at our fire. Standing at our queen's side." His gaze moved to Leif, then past him to the future he preferred. "Traitor." Leif didn't answer. "You don't argue when the rope has already been thrown over the beam." He kept his bleeding palm against Freydis's because moving it would be a different kind of confession. The cold climbed his arms. He could hear snow. The old hush. "By the law," Hakon continued, "any man bearing forbidden runes shall be put to death. By the circumstances," his glance flicked to Freydis's hand, quickly for mercy. "No," Freydis said. It was not a cry. It was a compass. She stepped between Leif and the king as if claiming reign for herself. Her cut still bled. It dripped to the rushes like a slow argument you cannot refute. "He saved me," she said. "On the deck. In the hall. In the night since when sleep went to the door and forgot the way back. He saved the crown you wear when you thought it was safe on its cushion." She turned to the elders. "If you kill him here, under this roof, tell me which part of our honor lives afterward. The part that punishes the hand that saved our blood? The part that calls fear prudence and murder law?" Varric made to speak. She burned him silent with a look. "You will not teach me about fear," she said, the calm edge of a blade. "I felt it on my throat." He lifted it off. Hakon's mouth tightened. "We do not kneel to personal debts. We kneel to gods and statutes." "Then listen to both," she replied. "Odin's ravens circle this hall? Let them. Let them carry a story worth hearing, that we remembered who we were when it was hard." She lifted Leif's hand so they could all see the mingled blood. "This oath is mine. If you hang him, the rope sits on my neck too. Hang a queen and see what gods that summons." The lawkeeper pressed his lips together to keep in something like respect. The shield maidens shifted their weight to the foot they used before drawing steel. Even the torches seemed to lean toward her. Hakon looked at Leif as if the man were a riddle that had irritated him for too long. "What would you say," he asked at last, "to a king who keeps you alive against sense?" Leif met his eye. "That sense has always come late to truth." He paused. "And that your queen has just spared your honor from its own sword." It stung. Hakon was still a man. He lifted his hand. "He lives," he said, and the lawkeeper let breath go like a prayer. "But under watch. Under weight. He will not step without eyes on his back. He will not carry weapon or whisper or whine without my leave. One rumor more, one wrong turn, one breath out of measure. Then judge him," Freydis said, softer now, victorious only in the way a soldier is when the field stops moving. She lowered their joined hands at last, palms slick, warmth fading. The wind ebbed. The runes dimmed to woodcarvers' ghosts. The hall remembered itself. People began to talk because people must. Which? Relic? Curse? Oath? The words shifted like fish in a net, none of them quite the one that named what had just happened. A woman stepped into the path of a king's fear and did not move when it tried to pass through her. Leif bound his hand with a strip of linen someone thrust into his palm without knowing why. Freydis flexed her fingers, shook out the ache, and did not wince where the cut had made its home. Outside, snow erased footprints as quickly as it took them. Inside, the story scratched its first line into the beams. And somewhere in the dark above the rafters, a draft traced the forbidden mark on Leif's chest and settled there, satisfied, for now, that the living had chosen to be braver than the law. A heart unchained. The days after the oath moved like a blade sheathed but not forgotten. Leif walked 3 steps behind Freydis in the hall, 2 steps to her right on the stairs, 1 step to her left when the wind howled at the parapet. Distance measured duty. Distance hid heat. The guards learned to ignore him loudly. The nobles sharpened their eyes on his back. Hakon watched without watching, the way a hunter lets a snare speak for him. Freydis wore calm like armor. But it wasn't steel. It was glass. At night the weight of it rang. She ate less. Spoke softer. Carried more. A queen is a country with borders on every side, and some of those borders live inside her ribs. "Walk with me," she said one afternoon, when the light thinned and the snow fell in patient threads. No court. No Varric. No lawkeeper. Only the hush of a world between breaths. They took the path to the lake. Black water cupped by black pines, the ice along the edges like torn cloth. The sky was one gray held together by another. Freydis didn't speak at first. She listened to the sound of frost breaking under boots. When she did, it was not the queen speaking. It was the person who had learned how to fold her loneliness small enough to fit under a crown. "I thought the crown would make rooms larger," she said. "It makes them narrower. It teaches you how to stand in the center and pretend the edges aren't closing." Leif did not offer comfort. He offered presence. His silence was not emptiness. It was a hand held out for a weight she didn't want to drop. She stopped at the shore. The lake exhaled a little fog. "My mother told me a story when I was a girl," she said. "About a queen who went to sea wearing a crown of fire. People bowed to the light and missed the burns. I didn't understand. I do now." He could have spoken about battle wounds that never scabbed. He could have told her how chains teach you to inventory yourself in pieces. He didn't. He watched the way the wind lifted her hair and set it down again. He kept count of the seconds she could carry without breaking. "Say something true," she said, turning to him with that half lift of the chin that meant challenge and plea in the same breath. He took the dare. "Every road I've walked led away from me," he said. "Until this one." Pause. "That frightens me." Her mouth opened, then closed, as if the answer wanted to be both a laugh and a sob. The lake snapped a thin thread of ice near the reeds. The sound went through them like an old warning finding a new name. The feeling grew in him the way winter eats a field, quiet, relentless, certain. He held it down because holding it down was the only proof he still had discipline. Love was not a word he owned. It was a spell he wasn't allowed to speak. He kept it in his chest like contraband breath. "Leave then," she said suddenly without looking at him. "If standing here is a wound, leave. Take the river path. Take the forest that remembers you. Go." "You should have." "You didn't. You brought me to the lake to tell me that?" "I brought you here because this is where truth sounds clean," she said. Then she turned and the glass in her face cracked. "You saved me once, Leif. Do not abandon me now." It broke him in a quiet way. Not a fall. A yielding. He stepped closer than the map allowed. The crown didn't vanish. It simply became a little less heavy between them. He reached for her hands, then stopped because the world is a ledger and some debts you pay by not touching. "Tell me what to be," he said, "and I'll be it until I can't breathe." "I don't want you to be anything but yourself," she answered. "That is the trouble." The trouble. The line they had drawn with iron and blood and fear. He looked at the water and saw it looking back, the mirror we deserve when we lie to ourselves. He forced a laugh that was only a breath dressed up. "I should go," he said. "Not forever. Far enough that the court forgets your pulse when it counts your steps." "You are my steps," she said low. "I will not let them count me smaller." He nodded. He didn't agree. He began to say a word that could have been goodbye or forgive or wait, and that was when the messenger found them, snow on his lashes, throat raw, fear riding him like a second rider. "My lady," the man gasped, dropping to one knee on ice that didn't ask permission. "The outer beacons. They're lit." Freydis didn't blink. "From where?" "South and east." He swallowed. And, within, the lake tightened. Even the wind paused to hear it right. Freydis's face emptied itself of softness and filled with purpose the way a hand fills a glove. Within, a storehouse door found unbarred. The armory keys missing. A warder drunk with wine he swears he never drank. The messenger's voice stuttered. A traitor in the walls, my lady? Leif felt the word land in him and rearranged pieces that had never quite fit. Traitor. He had worn the suspicion like a cloak tailored by other men's fear. Now the shape had a body. He scanned the shoreline as if the trees could confess. He found only pines and the old habit of blame. Freydis turned to him. The lake threw gray light onto her skin. We go back, she said. Now. He nodded, but the thing inside him that had learned maps started talking again. The lower path will be watched, he said. Take the hunter's trail. It eats horses. It will spare our necks. She didn't argue. Ride. They cut a line through the trees that pretended to be no path at all. Snow grabbed at stirrups, branches clawed cloaks. The smells changed, lake to pine, pine to smoke, the closer they came to the walls. From the ridge they saw it, beacons like red eyes, gates like clenched teeth, men moving in patterns that spoke not of panic, but of something worse, certainty. In the outer yard, Varric stood with his good furs and bad news face. Hakon beside him, jaw set, eyes bright in that way that means a man is about to pretend a decision is a fact. People looked at Leif the way a crowd looks at a storm cloud deciding whether to break. Arms? Freydis said to the captain. Double the north watch. Bolt every door that knows a secret. She dismounted without waiting for hands. Snow took the imprint of her boots and held it like scripture. Varric didn't address her. He addressed the air just to the right of her crown. It would be easier, he murmured, if we weren't harboring an uncertainty at the Queen's elbow. Leif stared past him, counting archers, counting ladders, counting men who looked at him and saw the simplest answer to a complicated question. He felt Freydis's gaze on him and met it. No plea, no promise. Just the shared acknowledgement that whatever was about to happen would try to make their choices smaller. That night the castle breathed like a hunted thing. The fires burned too hot then too low. Footsteps practiced lies. Keys got heavier. In the great hall, Hakon assembled the council and let the storm of words turn on one point. Who? And in the corridor outside, where torchlight writes its own rumors on stone, Freydis stood with Leif in the half-dark and said the one thing that moved the world a finger with. If you must run, she whispered, run toward me. He shook his head. I'll run at the danger and leave you the door. Do not make me choose between a crown and a man, she said, voice breaking once and then hardening again. I am tired of being only metal. He should have told her he was already lost to her. He should have said nothing. He said the truest small thing he had left. I will be where the blow lands first. Then the horn sounded, low, long, close. The enemy at the gates. And somewhere inside these walls, a hand already on the latch. The betrayal within begins as a whisper and ends like a verdict. By morning the scouts brought wreckage, broken arrowheads shaped like the enemy's, footprints that stopped and started as if men could borrow air. A storehouse had been opened with the right key. The South Sally Gate had been barred from the wrong side. Secrets had crossed the ice before sunrise. The council gathered like crows over a question they already wanted answered. It was sold, Varric said, voice smooth, eyes sharp. And who in this hall knows the enemy's paths as if they were veins in his own hand? He didn't bother to look at Leif. He looked at Freydis as if accusation could be aimed like a spear and she would be the softer target. Hakon let silence fatten the suspicion until it almost fed itself. Freydis didn't step back. Bring proof, she said, the words flat enough to lie level on stone. Or bring shame for speaking without it. Proof arrived dressed as coincidence. A warder swore he'd seen Leif near the armory at midnight. A kitchen boy remembered the slave's voice in an alley no one used. A scribe placed him in 2 places at once with the confidence only the fearful possess. Leif said nothing. He wore quiet like a shield. That evening the hall moved under a low sky of rumor. The lamps burned with a guttering wick. The sentries counted breaths too fast. Hakon dismissed the court early and took his meat alone, a man who believed he had built a room no blade could enter. Freydis found Leif on the north wall, where the wind could strip a lie down to bone. "We are being herded," she said. "I feel the fence," he answered. "Walk me through it." She forced calm into her throat. "If you were them. If you wanted to break us. How?" "First you set the wolves outside the gate," he said. "Then you teach the sheep to bite one of their own." He met her eyes. "You make me the story so no one reads the truth." "Then don't give them ink," she said. "Stay where I can see you." He did. Until the alarm tore the night. Not a horn. A sound roar. A woman screamed from the western passage, cut short, then choked. Leif ran before thought could argue. Freydis was a breath behind him. Torches threw wild geometries on the walls. The corridor narrowed, then opened, then bent, as if designed to confuse anyone who didn't live inside its turns. Leif's body remembered. He took the left by the tapestry, ducked the low lintel, cleared the threshold, and stepped into red. Blood on the rushes like a map spilled wrong. The smell of iron so thick you could taste the coin on your tongue. 2 guards face down, throats opened. On the dais at the far end, Hakon slumped sideways on his chair, eyes wide as doorways, his mouth trying to finish a word. In his chest, a dagger buried to the ring. Leif's feet moved. Training does that to a man when horror takes his hands. He skidded to the king, dropped to a knee, reached for the hilt because a blade in a body is a candle. Sometimes you must snuff it to save what's left. His fingers closed. The leather was warm. He pulled. Shouts hit the walls. People poured in like water through a breached bank. Varric first, face white and triumphant. Warders with spears. The lawkeeper with the horror of a man who knows exactly what the law will say. They saw a slave kneeling in blood. They saw a king dying. They saw a dagger in the wrong hand. Leif stood slowly, palms red, blade redder. "He was alive," he said, voice steady because someone's must be. He needed. Varric didn't let the sentence live. Seize him. Spears took his arms. Rope learned his wrists again. The world narrowed to torchlight and breath and the small sound Hakon made as his last air remembered how to be wind. "Stop." Freydis's voice cracked once, then held. She pushed through the wall of bodies and stood before Leif, before the weapon, before the mouth of the night. "Let me see the dagger." Varric hesitated just long enough to make his victory taste better. He gestured. A guard wrested the blade from Leif's hand and laid it on a cloth like an offering no one wanted. Freydis leaned in. It was the king's dagger, ornate, balanced, the hilt wound in dark leather. And there, along the base of the blade where gold met steel, a rune had been etched in a craftsman's hidden flourish. A hooked stave crossed by 2 lines and circled by a ring. She knew it before she named it. Her throat closed around the word anyway. The same mark that lived under Leif's collarbone. The hall breathed in as one. The lawkeeper whispered, "Prohibited sign. Treason carved in iron." Varric didn't whisper at all. "The blade and the bearer," he said softly, "speak the same language." Leif met Freydis's eyes. Not pleading. A request. Believe the thing under your breath, not the thing on the table. She felt the floor tilt, the past and future jostle for room in her chest. "This is made," she said, forcing sound through a closing door. "Someone has placed our fear in our hand and called it evidence." Varric spread his fingers. "And someone has placed a dead king at our feet and called it tragedy." "Enough," the captain growled, but the room had already decided. Grief turns quickly to order when it is afraid of what it might feel. They dragged Leif to the cellars. The ropes bit through old scars like a wheel finding a rut. Freydis followed as far as the iron gate and set both palms against it as if she could move a century with her hands. "Give me the night," she said to the captain. Give me the time to prove what this is. You have until dawn, he said not unkindly. After that the east gate. She ran the castle like a hunter runs a ridge, fast and low. She checked the armory. No break, no force, just a key that had known the lock intimately. She spoke to the warder who had been drunk on strange wine. He wept salt that didn't smell of mead. She knelt with the dead guards and noted the angle of the cut, the clean work of a hand that had practiced on animals, not men. Little truths that couldn't shout over the large lie. At last she stood alone with the dagger under lamplight. She traced the rune with the tip of a nail. The etch was fresh, the edges still bit. She pressed the marking against a scrap of wax and lifted the impression. Perfect, cruel. The same small line at the top. The same ring. The same defiance. It matched the scar beneath Leaf's skin like a signature matches a name. Who did this? She asked the empty room. The room didn't answer. The wind at the window slit said only, hurry. Dawn bled pale into the court. The bell told the kind of note that turns a crowd into a single animal. The east gate waited with its old wood and new rope. Leaf stood between two spearmen, head bare, hair unbound, eyes clear in a way that hurt to look at. The mark on his chest glowed only because the cold made every scar a small sun. Fridas pushed through the press, elbows forgetting they were royal. Stop, she ordered, and the order carried because people remembered last night when she had stood between a man and a law and the world had not fallen. The lawkeeper shook his head. The statute is bright. So is the trap, she spat. She held up the wax impression, the twin of the rune. This dagger bears his mark because someone wanted it to. The blade was dressed after the fact. Varric smiled with the pity of a man who has already eaten. Grief makes poets of us. Fridas stepped to Leaf. Close enough to smell iron in winter and the quiet he kept for her. She lowered her voice to a place only he could hear. Say that you did not. I did not, he said. No embroidery. No plea. Just the truth raw as a cut. She turned to the crowd. He saved me. He swore to me. He has worn our suspicion without giving it shape. I ask you, for once, believe the thing that hurts. The captain's jaw worked. The rope waited. The gate loomed. The elders stared at their feet, hoping the earth would learn to swallow awkwardly fast. Hakon's chair stood empty on the wall walk, the absence larger than any presence had ever been. Power shifted in the air like a hawk changing thermals. Varric lifted his hand. By the king's law, he said, by the mark and the blade, by the night and its witnesses. Fridas lunged. No. The guards took Leaf forward 2 paces. The crowd moved as crowds do, away from guilt toward spectacle. The rope creaked. Snow caught its breath. Leaf. Freydis's voice broke on the stone, on the sky, on the bone of anyone who had ever loved outside their permission. Leaf. He did not fight. He looked at her like a man looks at the first light after a long night and lets it name him. The world narrowed to a circle of frost, a knot of rope, a queen's hands reaching through a future that refused her. And as they led him toward the gate and the beam and the end, her scream tore the morning in two. The secret revealed. Iron remembers Riss. The cell carried that memory like a sour breath. Leaf sat with his back to the wall, rope burns raw at the edges, blood dried in the lines of his hands. Dawn had tried to enter through the slit of a window and failed. Footsteps moved above like slow thoughts. He's a lamp. Fridas. She shut the door behind her and leaned into it as if holding off an ocean. No guards inside. She had traded something for that. She didn't say what. The lamp cut a thin orange circle out of the cold. Tell me, she said. No courtesy left. No cord in her throat. Only a woman whose hourglass had stopped and who planned to kick it over. Leaf lifted his head. No self-pity. The quiet he wore for her. Truth first or mercy first? Truth. Always truth. He nodded. I was born in this castle, he said. In a room without windows. To a woman who had once served your father's father and who stopped being allowed to stand in sunlight when she started showing. He touched his chest where the forbidden rune lived. When a child is born out of wedlock to a king, you give him a mark and take his name. It keeps the blood safe and the throne straight. If the king falls, the mark tells you where the spare bones are. Her face did not move. Only her hand. It closed and opened once. Whose spare bones? The old king's, he said. Before Hakon. Before the storm year. When the fjord froze and men walked across it as if it were a road. He kept the people fed and the gods at bay. And then one winter he didn't wake. He let the next sentence sit for a heartbeat. He didn't die. He was removed. Freydis's jaw went hard. By whom? By men who called themselves necessary, Leif said. A council who loved power more than continuity. They cut him clean. They set Hakon in his chair with a speech about stability. They looked at the boy with the mark and asked themselves whether a future was a risk they could afford. She took a step nearer. The lamp painted amber along her cheek, then broke across the wet in her eye. And a child travels easy, he said. I was winter bargain to a trader and then to a warband and then to a king who bought bodies like timber. By the time I knew how to spell my name in bone, it belonged to someone else. Silence dragged its train across the stone. Finally she whispered, the mark is not a curse. No, he said. It's a claim. Then why hide it? Because claims get cut off, he said. Because living was quietly harder than dying loudly. Because I learned that a chain is sometimes a shadow that lets you walk in daylight. She swallowed. The dagger. The rune. Freshly etched, he said. The cut edges still bit the gold. You saw that. Whoever set the blade set the story. They needed the mark to point at me or the crowd would ask too many questions. Varric, she said, like a door opening onto a room she always suspected was there. And those like him. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. He was a man who understood that names can be knives too. The night of the attack, he added, the Sally Gate bar from the wrong side, the right key in the wrong lock. Those are chores for men who know the inside. Freydis exhaled a laugh without humor. The inside is a liar, Leif. Her gaze lifted, fierce again. And I am done listening to it. He's again. A scrape outside. She moved fast. From her cloak she took a narrow file wrapped in wool, a skein of dark cloth, a tiny file that smelled like apples and sleep. We have minutes, she said. Maybe less. He stared a fraction too long. You'll be blamed. I already am, she said. I may as well be useful. She knelt, unwrapped his wrists with hands that didn't shake, slid the file under iron, and worked with the economy of someone who has sat too long with helplessness and decided to break it with teeth. The cuff side then gave. She pressed the file into his palm. For the guard outside. He'll wake. I'm not kind enough to make him a ghost. And after? Leif asked. After you run, she said. He shook his head. After I run, they kill you slowly in words and quickly in law. After you run, she repeated, eyes level with his. You circle. You find the mouth the enemy plans to eat us with and you break its teeth. He took her hand and kissed the place the oath had cut. Do not stand on the wall, he said. They will aim at the crown and hit the heart. I will stand where you can find me, she answered. And nowhere else. It went the way desperate goes. The guard drank his sleep. Shadows learned to carry a man. Stone did not remember. Snow accepted new footprints as if they were old friends. A door that shouldn't have opened did. A hall that should have been watched wasn't. Somewhere someone wanted him to flee. He went the other way. By dusk, the beacons flared again, south and east, the long red tongues licking at the clouds. War came not like a wave but like a tide that had finally decided to stop pretending. Horns bellowed. Arrows learned to fly. Men remembered whose hand they trusted at their shoulder. Leif found the river mouth where the ice had been cut into neat flows, bridges to carry raiders across in the fog. He took 3 men there with the chain he had kept hidden like a prayer you don't say in public. He bled and did not count it. He broke and did not notice. He sprinted the last hill in a body that had decided that breathing was a luxury. The inner yard was already a map of screams. Fridas on the stair, sword naked, hair blown into a flag, the crown not on her head but in her stance. Varric at her back, too close to be accident, calling orders that thinned the defense at the north gate while pretending to thicken it. Leaf hit him like winter hits a field. A shoulder. An elbow. The chain. Varric went down hard with a sound that made guilt audible. The guard beside him yanked a horn to his lips. Leaf smashed teeth instead. Fridas saw it, saw the angle, the betrayal, the gate half open to accept reinforcements that wore the wrong boots. "Close it," she cried. "Now." They slammed the bar just as the first ladder kissed the stone. A spear thrust through the gap and tasted meat. Leaf shoved men where they needed to be, threw his weight where the wall bowed. He moved like a man whose body had made an agreement with death. Later, not now. Varric crawled backward, hand to mouth, eyes full of rage that someone had dared turn him into a mortal. Fridas kicked his blade away without looking. "You will answer," she said. "When I have time to hear lies." The fight ate time and gave back yards. Men went down and didn't rise. Women rose and did not go down. The night became an anvil. They hammered. The enemy hammered back. On the wall, Leaf and Fridas found the rhythm they had learned at the lake. The space between breath and decision where 2 people can fit if they teach themselves to be brave at the same pace. An arrow found him when he turned to haul a boy behind a shield. Oh, ugly. The kind that poisons without names. He grunted and tore it free with a twist that made the edges go white. Fradis's eyes flicked to the wound. He shook his head. "Later." She nodded. "Later." They broke the last ladder with a log that had once dreamed of being a beam in a house where children would learn to count. The raiders backed into fog, recalculating cowardice. The horn that had started the night bleated a retreat poorly disguised as strategy. It should have ended there. It didn't. Varric lunged from the stair with a knife he had hidden like a thought he was ashamed to think. Fridas turned in time to catch his wrist. He was strong. Hatred lends men leverage. The blade kissed her throat and then reconsidered. Leaf came from the side, fast enough to be late by only a blink. He took the cut meant for her, below the ribs where breathing keeps its home. Varric gaped at the mistake the world had made, then at the chain at his jaw, then at the sky as his legs forgot their lessons. He slid down the stair like spilled wine. The knife clanged. The yard went suddenly quiet in the way a room does when a child drops a cup. Leaf knelt because his body said it was time. Fridas caught him because her body refused to learn that lesson. Warmth pumped through his fingers. He looked at it with a kind of curiosity, the way a man watches a bird he doesn't know the name of. "No," she whispered. "No. Not this." "It was always one of these," he said and found the breath to smile. "Better this." Men dragged Varric away, shouting words like treason and trial, and finally, while no one held them back, the gate held. The torches found new air. Above the yard, the dawn made a thin promise at the edge of the world. Fridas lowered him to the stone with a care that could have mended it. She pressed both hands into the wound as if she could convince blood to be obedient. He lifted one bloody palm and laid it over hers, palm to palm, oath to oath. The mark at his chest gleamed once, not with blasphemy but with belonging. "I didn't run," he said. "I would have hunted you if you had," she managed, and then broke on the last word. "Stay." He looked at her as if the stories had finally learned to tell themselves right. "I was never your slave," he said. "You were my reason." His eyes dimmed the way lamps do when a room goes quiet. His chest tried once more and decided it had kept its promises. Fridas bent over him. Snow fell without sound. Somewhere a raven took a single step on the wall and tilted its head, as if listening to a song it hadn't heard in years. She pressed her forehead to his, salt and iron and a love that had learned too late it could speak its name. "You were never my slave," she whispered, and the yard heard it, and the stone kept it, and the morning took it to the fjord. Years passed. Seasons rolled over the north like waves smoothing stone. What once had been war turned into stories, and what once was pain became song. The people still spoke his name, Leif the Slave King. The man who broke chains not to wear a crown, but to keep it from falling on those who could not lift it. Children whispered his story beside hearths. Old warriors raised cups in his honor before battle. And every year, when the first snow touched the fjord, someone laid a sword on his grave, not as tribute but as recognition, steel saluting flesh that had remembered what courage looked like. The mound was built on the ridge above the lake where he once stood beside the queen. The same black water, the same patient wind. Over it, they placed stones carved with the oath he had sworn, the words that once bound him in blood now binding him to legend. Not all men are born free. But all can choose what to do with what remains. Freydis ordered no statue. She said the sky was large enough to remember him. But the people carved one anyway. A man with chains at his feet and light in his hands. Some swore the expression on the stone was not of suffering, but of peace. Years later, when the wars had gone quiet and even the fields had forgotten the tread of armies, Freydis vanished. One morning she was there, the crown on the throne, her voice steady as ever, and that night the bedchamber stood empty, the fire still burning, her cloak folded on the chair. No note. No cry. No sound of hooves on the road. Only the open window and the wind carrying something soft, something like a name. Fishermen said they saw her on the cliffs near the old battlefield, hair loose, eyes lifted to the sky. She was talking, not praying, as if the wind itself were answering back. Others claimed she walked the high passes barefoot, speaking to the snow the way one speaks to an equal. And on nights when the moon burned red above the fjord, the guards at the watchtower swore they heard two voices in the storm. One woman's, one man's, mingled like memory and echo. The kingdom changed hands a dozen times after that. Kings rose, crowns tarnished, wars began again. Smaller, less holy, less certain. But one thing endured, the story. They called it the Song of the Slave King. A tale of love born in chains, of loyalty stronger than law, of a queen who defied gods and men to save a man who had no name, and of a man who gave his life to remind her what freedom meant. Time, that old thief, took everything else. But when the bards sing it by the fires, when the wind runs through the pines above his grave, when a lonely heart looks at the horizon and wonders if love can truly break fate, his voice returns, low and certain, like thunder hiding behind the clouds. And the narrator, the one who always sees how stories end, whispers the only truth that ever mattered. Some are born kings, some slaves, but only a few are remembered as legends. If this story found a place in your heart, let it stay there a while. Tell me, do you believe that love, real love, can rewrite the destiny even the gods have written?